Welcome to Lesson 10 of PSRM Fundamentals Overview. Here we'll be looking at the overpayment process. An overpayment process is used to eventually refund a overpayment to a credit, which is on an obligation to a taxpayer, and we'll be looking at the different entities involved, including overpayment process, refund control, and bank events. And we're looking at different types of refunds, including check, sending a check in the mail, or creating a different type of overpayment, a direct deposit into a bank. And we will also looking at the concept of offsetting a amount of credit to another obligation that still is in debt before sending out the check. In our case, we're going to do that by, again, looking at our example, the store BBB, where we have seen that we have been dealing with the quarterly tax roll and looking at the first quarter, and as we have been using this obligation throughout, if you remember, we now have the balance to be zero because we have written off the excess debt. That's what we did last time through the overdue process. And if we have a look at the other types of obligations, there haven't been any tax forms submitted for the second quarter, and therefore there is no financial transactions. Now what we're going to do, in order to trigger an overpayment for this particular quarter, we're going to submit a tax form. And I have the tax form here ready to be posted. Let's have a look at how I filled it in. I filled it in for this store BBB. I'm using now the second quarter period, and I filled in the amounts so that the assessment is 1,000, and the enclosed payment is for an overpayment, an excess of 400. And we will see what happens when we post this tax form. So I'm going to post. Let's see what's going to happen. What we see is that we have an adjustment for 1,000. The balance has gone down to be minus 89, meaning there's an overpayment. If we look at the financials here, and we look at this particular obligation. Yeah, we have one assessment there. We see that there's been some interest and so on other things, and that's because we filed late. But we have an overpayment because we have paid altogether 1,400, and the total actually was 1,310. There's 89 allocated credit. And this is a classic case of being in an overpayment situation, and the question is, how do we relieve that overpayment? Now, we could have actually, within that tax form, triggered an overpayment process directly by adding a form rule to create the overpayment process. That's one way for the process to be triggered, through a form rule. Another way is through the collection class overdue rules that we saw previously when we looked at overdue process. Those can also trigger an overpayment process. We're going to create our overpayment process manually, and we're going to do so first of all by creating one that we would like to have a refund by check, and then we'll actually look at another example when we do that through direct deposit. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my main menu, and I'm going to create an overpayment process. And there are different types of overdue processes, as you'll see. First of all, though, we need to pick the particular obligation that we are going to create the overpayment process for, and we're going to be doing it for the second quarter. And we're going to see sales and use approval. There's going to be a need for a supervisor to approve the amount to be sent back to be refunded. You click OK. It's going to ask me what type of refund I want, and I'm going to send it out back to the taxpayer by check. Since we have an address on that account, that check, physical check, can be mailed back to that address. So we have now created an overpayment process which kicks off the process in order to create the check. Now, in this particular case, the expectation could have been that you would have expected a need to approve this $89. In fact, you do not need to approve it because it has, if we actually look for a moment at the overpayment process type, there are many different configurable points here, but one of them I will look at the moment is the approval information. And the approval is only if there's more than $100, and since there's only 89, there's no need to actually have anyone to approve it. So that's why we don't have any need to approve. However, there is another concept that needs to be dealt with, and that is something called a refund control. And the status of the overpayment process is now refund approval in progress. And that's because we have to understand how the overpayment process works. What actually happens is that if the amounts for the overpayment process are small, then that credit might be written off. Then if the amounts are above a certain amount, 100 in our case, then there's an approval. There's also a concept of offsetting to other obligations, and we'll see that in another example. Let's say one obligation is still in debt, whereas another one is in credit. That credit can be moved to the other obligation. But once that happens and we don't have the other obligations in debt, the only other obligation that we've dealt with was the first quarter, which is zero balance, it needs to go to a refund control. And refund control is a different process which deals with not whether we want to approve this individual overpayment, but rather whether we have enough money in the bank, we have, the tax authority as a batch wants to look at whether they're able to approve sending in or writing checks at this moment. And that is dealt with through something called a refund control. And that is at the state at which we are at the moment. The life cycle of overpayment process is actually rather complicated. And what we have done and seen so far is that we started with the initial state. And what has happened is that we have moved to something called we have approved, and the approved state could then go to a state called refund approval in progress. And to understand that, we have a different life cycle called refund control, and we're going to actually look at that at this moment. So I'm going to go back to my overpayment process, and the state of the overpayment process is now in refund approval, because we now need to create something called a refund control. So I'm going to go over here, and this is normally done in batch at night time, and something which is done looking at totals amounts of overpayment processes, and not on individuals, but I'm now just simply creating a scenario where I am pretending to be creating a batch online and doing this online. So you can actually pick up all overpayment processes which have pending amounts, and in this case you can define the criteria that you want to pick up a specific type of overpayments based upon the criteria which are shown on the screen. Here I'm actually going to pick up all overpayments, and therefore I don't need to set any criteria. And I'm now going to be creating a refund control. I need to validate it before it picks up any of the overpayments. And now I have linked overpayments 8928. It shows the linked overpayment. It's the overpayment that I just created that is waiting. That overpayment is waiting to have this refund control processed. And we can make a decision about whether we want to approve it, and it's automatically approved because it's below a certain amount. There's no need to actually approve it. Generally, the refund control has its own approval, but since it's below a certain threshold, in this case as well, it's been automatically approved. Okay, so the refund control has a refund control type, and if I looked at that type, you will see that it also has a approval with thresholds, and the threshold shows that below 100 it doesn't need to have anyone to approve it. The total amount of all overpayment processes is very small, it's less than 100, we don't care about this, it's automatically approved. But now once it's been approved, we have to run a batch, which will then trigger the overpayment process to move to the next state, and to create the check. Okay, so if we look back again at our slides, we are actually at refund approval in progress over here, and we want to move to the approved state, and that will happen only happen in the case of when we run that batch. So we need to go back to the refund control. I'm going to go to this batch over here. In fact, I can run it directly here and go to submit a batch online, which will run this batch and then trigger the overpayment process to move to its final complete state. So the batch is now completed, and if we go back to the refund control, we will see that it's now moved to state approved, and if we go back to the overpayment process, it is in the state complete. And what it shows now is that the 8928 was now sent as a refund to the taxpayer. So if I actually display now the allocation, you'll see that for this particular period of time, you can see everything this way. Now you will see that there was an overpayment for 8928, and that was now sent out. So in fact, this particular amount that was the refund and sent out to the customer, to the taxpayer, and now the balance is at 0. Okay, so this is an example of a check sent out, a paper check. What we're going to do now is give an example of a refund, but this time it will be through direct deposit. Before we do that, what I'm going to do is actually cancel the payment on this particular obligation and move this into a debt. In other words, there was the payment that was sent out for 1,400 is going to be cancelled, and then I'm going to create another tax form, and we're going to see another example of a tax form, but in this case it's going to be it's going to use offsetting. So first of all, what I'm going to do is go to the payment, and what I'm going to do is go to the tender and cancel the 1,400. Let's say the check came in, but in fact in the end it was a data entry. I'm going to cancel it. We'll see the effect on the balance. Obviously it will have a big effect on the balance. The balance is now 1,400, And that makes sense because if I go back to my here, we'll see that we actually collected nothing anymore, and we've paid back $89, and that's $1,400 now owed to the tax authority because the basically, let's say, the check bounced or something like that. Now, what we're going to do is create another tax form for also an overpayment, and you'll see in this case that before it sends out a check, in this case it'll be a direct deposit, it will have to pay off, it will offset the $1,400 on this obligation, and then only after that pay out the rest. So I'm going to go to and pick out another tax form that I have ready. And this one is going to be for the third quarter. Let's have a look at this tax form. So again, we need to refresh this. Amounts should be show a balance of $1,400 in debt, which it does now. Now the thing is, if we look at the details of this particular tax form, it's for the third period. The amount assessed is $1,000. I'm paying $4,000, so it's a big overpayment. But in this case, we have to remember that even though there's a large overpayment, there is another obligation, which is the second quarter obligation, which is in debt for $1,400, and we'll see how that works. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to post it. And now we see that our balance is now gone to over $1,300. Let us look at our financials to see if we understand that. Well, we can look at our financials, obviously, by obligation, and then let's do that. If we look at it by the second period, this is the second period, and it's the same. It's in debt for $1,400. If I look at my third period, we see that it's in overpayment for a large amount, for $2,795. But the overall balance, based upon the account, on the account level, shows a balance of positive $1,300. Okay, so the thing is, can we now send out, I would like to send out or do a direct deposit overpayment and a refund for this $1,395, but before I do so, I want to actually transfer funds from this particular obligation to the debt obligation, which is the second quarter. So now let me create my overpayment, another overpayment. And I'm going to be doing this one for the third period. And I'm going to use the approval. Let's see what happens. Now I'm going to use a direct deposit. And here it asks me for bank details. The bank details could actually come directly from my account. I'm actually going to write in the details here. So the details of the bank account details, I'm just making a fictitious account, but the routing number in fact has to come from, I will show you, from for something called the autopay source, which I have something filled in here, and we have to take a value. I have some bank details here, and it's the external source ID which needs to match with the routing number. I'm going to do a checking account. I'm going to put my name my name in, initials, and the requested amount, remember it was 1,300. I'm going to actually only ask for not a total amount back. I just want 1,200 amount back by direct deposit. So I can save that. And creates an overpayment process. And let's have a look at now. It shows me that the approval is in progress, that I cannot yet send out, create the overpayment process because it's above the amount of 100, if you remember, and I need to actually, a to-do has been created, and I need to complete the to-do and log in with a different user, and that user will be able to complete this overpayment and approve it, and then we will be able to carry on. Okay, because we have the overpayment process type set to have approval. It's above the 100 amount that we set for approving, so I need to approve it. And in order to do that, I'm going to log out and come in with my own personal login. I'm going to find that overpayment process. It was a sales and use, and you should be able to find this one. It's approval in progress. In fact, you see that it needs to have multiple approval because it's above 1,000, so we're going to actually approve this first of all. And it still needs more approval, and that's because if I look at my overpayment process type again, it's set to have multiple approval. Multiple approval, so that means that level 1 and level 2 supervisors need to be able to approve. So I've approved once, but I'm going to need to log out and do this one more time, and I'm going to come in with another user. Again, I'm just pretending to be different supervisors and doing this process. So that should be the approval that we need. So now it's moved to refund approval in progress. But before that we do that, I'm going to actually open up another tab. It's going to be important for us to view what's going on, but let's wait for that to come up. What do we see? The initial amount was 2,795, but what happened was that the amount now is gone down to 1,395.40, and the reason is that there's been some offsetting for 1,400, and it's been offsetted to a different obligation. If we put in our store and go to the financial information, we should be able to see that. If you remember, the whole point was that we had two different obligations that we're dealing with, and if we actually have a look at obligation for second quarter, you will see that we have a credit, other credits, and this was coming through with an offset. All these credits were coming through an overpayment offset from the third quarter, paying off the 1,400. By the way, if we actually fill in these details, you might have seen this, that sometimes we actually show the calculations, the last charges, and it says calculated through. So, for example, interest is showing till the end of December, but the last payment came in, penalty came in in August, and so on. So it actually shows you this line calculated till the latest date. Anyway, that's a side point. But we see over here that we have offsetting for the second quarter, and if we look at the third quarter, we have an overpayment for 1,400, which was the offsetting, and we now have an unallocated credit for 1,395, and that's the amount which I would now like to get my overpayment for. I want to get my direct deposit back for 1,395. In fact, I actually asked for a request for 1,200, so it'll be a little bit less than that. So what we have done now is moved our overpayment through the supervisor, through the approval mechanism. It needs to be done twice. It's now moved to the refund approval in progress, and we'll have to do the same concept as before, and that is create a refund control. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to use the same, and it most probably will need to have its own type of approval because it's above the 100 amount. So let's just see what happens. If I validate this, it should pick up the 1,395. Now it's gone into needing its own approval. Again, the reason why it needs approval is because it's more than the amount. Again, 100 more than amount. Here it shows for approval level single, which means that as opposed to multiple, it means that only one person will need to approve this. And since this is 10,000 anyway, it will not reach that amount. Level 1 will be sufficient to approve. What I need to do though is now go back out, and I'm going to log in with my user again and approve it. Again, the person who creates the particular refund control is not allowed to approve his own work, even if he has rights to it. So I go back to my refund control. There's one in approval. I need to approve this. So I approve it. And now I need to run the batch to trigger the overpayment process to move to the next state. Now in case of the check, that was the last step, but we'll see in this moment that for direct deposit, it's actually a little bit more complicated. So I save that. The batch has started, and take a few seconds to complete. So the batch is now completed. If I go back to the refund control, it has been approved. If I go back to my overpayment, we'll see what the status of the overpayment is. So it shows it's complete, but the actual balance still shows that we haven't paid out to direct deposit. And that's because that in the case of direct deposit, we still have to do another a few different steps. We need to actually send the bank details which we have collected over here to the bank, and the bank has to approve it. And for that, we have a separate control called the bank event. And within the log, we show the bank event that was created. And this bank event has to go through its own life cycle to complete. First of all, it needs to actually create the extract for the banks, send it to the bank, the banks need to approve it, and only after that do we update the balance. Okay, so we have a refund, we have an overpayment process, we always have a refund control, but even after a refund control is approved and the overpayment process has now gone to a complete step, that is not the end in the case of a direct deposit. For direct deposit, we also need to work with a bank event. And a bank event starts with a ready to extract and needs to then extract the data for the banks and be accepted by the banks. And only after that happens do we actually update the balance. Because we are only then are we assured that the amount of money got to the actual person, to the actual tax authority. So in order to do that, we're going to run a few different batches, which will generally be done in the background, in order to trigger that to happen. So the first batch that we need to run is the instruction extract, which creates the extract of the bank information that will be sent to the bank, and we have to fill in the file name of where the extract will go. And once that has been completed, if we go back to the bank event, we will see that we have now run this batch, and we are now actually ready to extract the batch on today's date. Generally, we might actually have dates a few days ahead, and in my setup here, I've configured it that all these batches run one after the other to create the extract, to download the extract, and to receive back from the bank. Second thing that we need to do is now run the extract and send it to the bank. So first of all, we run the bank event deferred monitor, and once that's run, the bank event has been updated to the next state, which is that the actual data has now been extracted, and now we just need to complete it by running the last batch. So now we have run the final batch. The bank event should now move from extracted to complete. Accepted. It's been accepted by the bank, and we've moved basically the bank event from the ready to extract, created the extract file, extracted the information, has been accepted by the bank, and now, only now, will we be able to actually direct deposit has been done to the taxpayer based upon the information that they gave us, and the information was filled in over here, if you remember, to actually give us direct deposit to this particular bank account and this routing number and the requested amount of 1,200. So 1,200 was given back, and there is still a balance for 195 because the total amount was not requested. So that basically gives you an overview of the different types of overpayment processes that we have. The two main processes that we see are one to send out a check, and another one when we do a direct deposit where the method used is using a bank event. There is actually an older way of sending out direct deposits using something called a negative payment. I'm not actually showing that here, but you can look at the system and the setup of overpayment process type to see how that works. So what we've seen is that in all cases for overpayments, there are concepts like needing approval. Approval is based upon thresholds. We will always have overpayment needs to go through a refund control, That means that the tax authority needs to okay that they have enough funds to send out either or enough ability to send out checks in this specific time. And once the refund control is completed, sometimes there's also a bank event. In a case when there is an other obligation which is in debt, the system is set up that it can offset that amount to the different obligation before processing the overpayment.